child yelling. No, hang on, because they're about to put me live, but maybe once I get into the panel, we can perhaps. Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to ring my husband and ask him to stop yelling. He's from New York and I can hear him. He's not yelling. Hang on a second. Let me just ask him to quieten down slightly. I think he's deaf on being a guitar player, actually. He's not answering, but Zach's kindly closed the door. Good morning and welcome to a day packed with hugely relevant and insightful talks from industry leaders and innovators. The team here at Public Sector Executive has been busy behind the scenes preparing an event which promises to inspire education, innovation and collaboration within the community we're building. Whether you've been to one of our PSE365 virtual events before, or if you're new to the platform, we've really taken the time to listen, building much more than just a series of singular disconnected events. We've created a platform which allows you to access a wealth of resources, on-demand content, as well as continuing to provide networking opportunities. This is all part of the community we're building to extend the reach of knowledge shared today. We're also able to share with you the digital marketplace, providing valuable expertise you and your teams can digest when your schedules allow. Without support from our partners, events like these simply wouldn't be possible. It's worth noting that all of the content from today is CPD certified. So for every hour of content you watch live, you'll earn 1 CPD point. The PSE team will issue your individual CPD certificates following the event. Aside from the talks, there are plenty of opportunities to network at each break. You can connect and learn from other delegates here today using our speed networking functionality, which I do encourage you to use. So there's a bit of background to explain what's on offer. Now we can move to the focus of today. The public sector has been only too aware of the demand and need for digital transformation following the pandemic. The pandemic showed clearly our reliance on and the benefits of technology when unable to meet and be served face to face. The digital world was a saving grace in many ways, helping keep us all safe, but the last 18 months also highlighted areas where perhaps we fall short and where upgrades are desperately needed. And the opportunities to overhaul aging IT infrastructure are ever present as digital disruption grows. There are possibilities to implement big data projects, drive citizen engagement, update networks, all for the purpose of the public sector becoming more efficient, effective, and resilient for the people it serves every day. Nevertheless, as we look to the future and the many opportunities it presents, how do we navigate through the options of innovative digital technology available whilst delivering value and positive impacts to the public? Today, we'll explore how we can deliver in the digital future and utilise data to progress towards transformation targets. An added benefit to today's proceedings is a bit of friendly competition to reward you for your hard work. Score points by engaging with the platform's different elements and potentially earn yourself a choice of reward come the end of play. Our gamification tools will be active throughout the day with an up-to-date leaderboard tracking delegate progress. So those who finish in first, second and third places respectively will have 250, 150 and £100 donated to either the Magic Breakfast charity or More Trees in their name and organisation. The Magic Breakfast charity can give a child a nutritious breakfast and a chance to succeed at school with every 34 pence donated. So a £100 donation would mean nearly 300 children getting a good start to their day. Or if you were to donate to More Trees, for every £1 donated, a tree is planted, helping obviously our climate. And of course, you can only be in with a shout of winning by getting out there and engaging with all of the great content we have to share with you and engaging with your peers. Join a live session, that's 50 points earned. Make a connection with another delegate in the platform, 100 points. Ask a question in a session or engage with one of our exhibitors, another 50. You get the gist. And finally, as we get ready to welcome our first panel of speakers, feel free to share interesting things you hear throughout the day across social media using the hashtag PSE365. That's hashtag PSE365. So let's kick off with our first leaders debate of the day, upgrading networks and infrastructure. It's imperative for the public sector to continually become more effective, efficient and resilient for the people it serves, which means continually upgrading both networks and infrastructure. The latest technologies must be examined in line with the needs of the public sector and the public to allow for maximum value to be harnessed and sustained. At the same time, ensuring agility for future advancements, alongside maintaining security in the transformation process. So, to help me explore what public sector leaders need to consider when navigating network and infrastructure upgrades, I'm delighted to welcome Owen Whitlock, Group Head of IT at Cantium in partnership with BDR, Geoff Connell, Head of Information Management and Technology at Norfolk County Council, and Yvonne Gallagher, Digital Transformation Expert at the National Audit Office. And do remember, this is a perfect opportunity for you to ask any questions you may have of our panellists by using the live Q&A feature on the right-hand side of your screen. Really like to think of our debates as a conversation, and that means that you're part of that conversation. So I'll ask as many of your questions as I can once we get started. So good morning to my panellists. As we said in that introduction, I think the pandemic has really only served to hasten the need for the public sector to embrace digital technologies and has probably highlighted some holes in the transformation plan. So I'd like to start by asking all of you how you view the speed up and what positive opportunities it may have actually opened up for us. And perhaps, Owen, you would do us the honour of kicking us off today.
Yeah, of course. One of the key things that we've seen was straight after or during that first lockdown, there was a real drive to enable people to start working from home. And that's continued throughout. So what we've been seeing is more and more people moving away from the office environment and offering truly agile working to their employees, which has helped with that work-life balance. And it's also helped people be able to work from home more and interact more with their families. So there's been that massive drive, which is also really opened up people's minds to other possibilities. So we've seen more and more people working in the communities to do with the NHS, and we've seen more and more managers open to the idea of allowing their people to work flexible hours. So it's not just been a technological challenge; it's also been a policy-based challenge. But really, it's opened up the office and working environment to a whole new set of possibilities.
Yvonne, how have you seen the last sort of 18 months to 2 years?
I think it's been really interesting from a government perspective, because what we did see really coming together was the collaboration between business users, policymakers, and the digital technology skills that are in all departments. And it's something that really is always being emphasized, how when government is doing policy, it really needs to engage with its digital specialists and business specialists to work out how things can be implemented practically and what the whole picture looks like. And I think things like the HMRC furlough scheme was a really good example of that. So I think that working together with digital community and the business and policy community in government was really, really it was really interesting and really good to see.
Geoff, can we get your initial thoughts? We lost you for a moment, but just on the impact really of the last 2 years and perhaps some of the positives we can take away from the speeding up of, certainly from the public's point of view, of having to embrace digital much more.
Well, certainly from a staff perspective, it accelerated our smarter working program with all our staff being able to work from home, but increasingly using video to contact residents, to provide more and more online services. So I think it didn't change anything we were doing, but it really massively accelerated it. It also highlighted to us the importance of people being digitally connected, having the connectivity, but also the skills and the equipment and all those things they need to be online, particularly during lockdown. it really brought home the importance of people having that connectivity, for older people to combat loneliness, and for young people to be able to do remote learning when the schools were closed. So yeah, it was more of an acceleration, I think, than anything else.
I'm interested to hear, Geoff, what you've been up to in Norfolk. I was reading that you've taken your super fast digital connectivity from 42% to 96% in recent years. Can you give our audience a bit of a flavour of the sorts of things that you've been doing at the council?
Yeah, so fibre is the backbone for all this connectivity. And so we've pursued shamelessly anybody's money that we can find across the system to help us improve connectivity. And as you say, 42% to 96% is a big step forward. But that's at super fast speed. So what it doesn't show you is the delivery of gigabit fibre as well, so 1,000 megabits per second. And we've been able to attract tens of millions of pounds of external funding, and it's really about providing connectivity in particular to those areas that aren't commercially viable, because we work in conjunction with the private sector, who are of course building out from cities and the areas that will provide the most income. So certainly in terms of fibre, we've made big strides forward, but also we mustn't forget mobile, the importance of mobile connectivity, especially in a rural county like Norfolk, and that can be challenging. And the third area, and perhaps we'll talk about it more later, is the Internet of Things. So types of opportunities that can bring. And we've gone from nothing to pretty much ubiquitous to county-wide network in just 2 years.
Gosh, that's impressive. That's really impressive stuff. Yvonne, the National Audit Office recently brought out a report on broadband and produced a guide for Government Risk and Audit Committee on cloud. I mean, what's been your approach to these topics, and how have those reports been received by the government?
I think really interesting on broadband. So clearly we've been very keen on looking at this, and because citizens need this adequate connectivity to engage with government services. And the Superfast programme delivered around 97% of the community, although, as Geoff says, still some rural and remote areas that are hard to reach are still not serviced at the moment. The National Infrastructure Assessment said existing broadband would become inadequate likely sometime in 2030s. So that this upgrade to full fibre needs to take place, and the original target was 2033. The current government manifesto pledge accelerated this to 2025, but without putting, we said in our report, they didn't put in place levers to make it happen. But that target was actually abandoned now in the last spending review. So it's now 85% by 2025. But there's no published plan for the remainder after that. And I think the timetable for the gigabit now is even further behind than when we last reported. So I think there's still broadband to some extent has been a little bit of it's fallen victim to now the whole priorities around COVID, the spending reviews, where now there's a lot of catch up. So broadband's really something we want to keep an eye on. And the other big area, I mean, it is a big area now that people are looking to cloud a lot for how this is really going to help. And we published a cloud guide a couple of years ago, but we updated it earlier this year. And the idea of this guide, it's not for practitioners, it's for a layperson's guide. So for risk and audit committees to guide the kind of questions that they should ask of management, and management should actually know about cloud. So we had some key messages really in that. And the first one was cloud won't always save money, and it's a mistake to think it will.
Yep.
And there's a graph in our guide, and it's based on Gartner, to demonstrate it costs more and takes much longer than people think. we also emphasize the importance of the retained function in the organization, especially the boundary where the provider stops being responsible for security and configuration, and that becomes the user's responsibility. So this boundary is the single most important thing to understand. So there's a lot of feeling around, we're going to put it in the cloud and all of our problems will be over. The other 2 points is that data is still owned by the organization, and they are the ones who own it and responsible for protecting it. And I think the big thing, though, is more and higher skills potentially are needed here. So I think there's a lot of feeling that, oh, it's great, people aren't needed to look after physical servers, etc. at the beginning of cloud, but actually people are needed to manage the security, deal with the alerts, and how they can be very complicated dealing with other services. So a lot to think of with cloud. So whilst it's got all those huge benefits, this isn't simple migrating to cloud.
Gosh, a very full answer there. Owen, do you want to pick up on anything Yvonne said before we move on to talking about infrastructure upgrades?
I've seen exactly that. So an awful lot of the organizations that I talk to, because we help an awful lot of organizations achieve their journey within IT, they always talk about the endpoint. They never talk about what they're trying to achieve. So they say, we want to move to the cloud, but they never ask the question, is the cloud right for us? And we're seeing this more and more, and we're bringing them back to basics and saying, okay, you want to move to cloud, but what is the underlying requirement that you have? And does that align with the cloud? Because it doesn't always necessarily align with that. So it's always asking that question in the organization. Are you looking at this right in the first place? Are you coming from a point of, we want to move to the cloud? Or are you coming from a point of, these are our requirements, how do we achieve them?
That's a fair point. And what do sector leaders, Owen, need to consider when they're navigating infrastructure upgrades?
Really, they need to engage with partners, or they need to have within themselves the skill set to understand what is out there in the broader market. More and more, especially IT people, we're inherently bad at this. We always look at the technologies we know. We don't necessarily look out there to the technologies we don't know. And more we see infrastructure leaders and leaders within these organizations saying, all right, I want to move to Microsoft Azure because that's the product that they know, rather than, again, coming at it from a base level perspective of what is our underlying requirement for the business, what's our future requirement, and how do we achieve those two things, and what technology is actually right for us, and engaging multiple sources, engaging multiple providers, and making sure that they have a great view of the market and that they have engaged as many disparate providers as possible.
Geoff, why is it important for local authorities to drive improvements in digital infrastructure in their localities?
Well, I think local authorities have got that convening role. They've got the opportunity to bring together funding and initiatives across the wider public sector, and also bringing in the private sector as well. I mean, ultimately, as we know, it's increasingly essential for residents to have access to online services to live their lives in quality ways, whether that's online schooling right through to assistive technology to help people live independently in their own homes for longer. But of course, it's also essential for business growth. And if you think of the loss of itinerant labour we've got in certain key markets, I mean, in Norfolk, you've got the care sector, which is an essential one. You've got the agriculture, and also the tourism industries. They're all really dependent on staffing, which is increasingly not available in the ways that we need. And so what we have to do is to help them to use technology to make up for some of those gaps, whether that's process automation, whether that's use of cloud services, or certainly agri-tech is a huge growth area, needing fiber connectivity, mobile connectivity, and increasingly the Internet of Things. I mean, Ben Burgess were the first company to really get hold of our IoT network in Norfolk and use it to exploit opportunities to improve yields and productivity in agriculture. So it's all sorts of things. And ultimately, the local authority is there to ensure that local people get the best quality of life, and to promote and support business growth.
And do you feel that's happening, Geoff, where you are? Do you feel you're providing a much better service for the people in your location?
I really do. I think the way that the council is evolving its services, and the NHS too. I see the NHS really exploiting digital opportunities in a way that I haven't seen in the past, working jointly with us around digital inclusion in particular, an essential element for both of us. And I have to say, I'm so excited by the opportunities here. I mean, we expect to see 100 to 200 million pounds of public sector investment coming into Norfolk for gigabit fibre over the next 2 to 3 years. 100 to 200 million. That's on top of what the private sector is bringing in, which is probably about the same again. Hundreds of millions of pounds of investment for ultra fast connectivity. I'm also seeing the shared rural network that we work very closely with, improving mobile coverage. That's a tougher ask, but we're still working on it together. So making 4G ubiquitous, and implementing 5G to top up in cities and high footfall areas where appropriate. So yeah, I think we're making a real difference, and I'm really enjoying being part of it. Inclusion
is something that we're certainly going to be talking about later on in the day, about making sure that everybody is included in this. If you're elderly and you're not very tech savvy, or if you're perhaps on a low income and can't afford a smartphone, etc. I think inclusion is really important. But also, it's made me realize, researching this conference, how actually digital can increase inclusion, because people who may be trapped at home and aren't able to get out are able to join things that perhaps they weren't able to join before. So I think, if handled rightly, inclusion can be dealt with really well. Yvonne, I was just wondering, what was the thinking behind the National Audit Office's recent report on government's challenges in major digital change programs?
We thought it was time to kind of bring together all of our findings that we have that we've undertaken over the last few years on major digital change programs, all of which have run into quite a lot of problems. So we wanted really to get under the covers here to say what there's some fundamental problems here. This isn't just about the people who are charged with delivering these programs, there's something else. So, and I think what we really wanted to do was to emphasize how digital transformation is about understanding how to move from the existing starting point to the new world. And it's not about starting afresh, which would be a lot easier. So quite often in government, there's talk of, or a lot of the things are initiated as if they're startups, but government is a major legacy environment that needs, so how that is changed is the problem, not what's the newest thing that we can do. So in our report, we really wanted to emphasize this really just isn't about the technology, and we grouped our findings really into two areas, and all about what needs to be thought about before projects and programs get even kicked off. And we highlighted 6 areas, and I think one was this whole capability issue, especially in senior leadership. And by capability, we mean business digital capability, not technical skills. So we are now living in a world that's very digital, all business is digital. And quite often we've seen these major programs kicked off with the kind of scope that clearly isn't well understood by senior decision makers, and it goes ahead on that basis. And it's a little bit like if you were managing a major construction program, everybody knows that you would, how generally speaking, you would build a road or a bridge, and you wouldn't get generalists dictating how, what kind of road, or I've seen something new in Australia, let's try a bridge that, like that. It just wouldn't happen. So I think this whole thing about understanding now digital business for senior leaders is really important. We've emphasized that a lot in our report. We also then focused on legacy systems and data, and the complexity now of legacy systems that have been in government 20 years, 30 years, 10 years, but they are all integrated together. And they've all got, quite often, the data in that is old data that was captured once for a specific purpose and is it's fragmented all across government, and it's fragmented within departments. So that's really difficult. What do we do about old legacy data? And the other thing that we really focused on is the funding issues. And quite often this whole thing about how you need to maintain legacy, keep it up to date, keep the data in good standing, that kind of maintaining what you've got, upgrading it on a regular basis, modernizing it, rather than when it comes to digital transformation, we often have something which says, here's the existing base, and we want to jump here in one go, rather than there should have been increments to over time to make that leap from where we are to digital, the modernization easier. So a lot of issues there.
Owen, just want to move on to safety really, and how sector leaders should be protecting their infrastructure against perhaps internal threats, ransomware. What would you suggest, Owen?
Really, they've got to run through the process of understanding what data they have, where it's sat. So they've got to identify where everything is, and not necessarily all organizations know where all of their critical data is sat and who has access to it as well. So really, there's been a big drive within IT to work on that zero trust, so that people only have access to the things they need access to, which really lessens the attack surface, even if there were to be an attack. The next step is really making sure that you've got all of those safeguards in place to make sure that you are doing everything possible to secure yourself against cyber criminals. So that's multi-factor authentication, that's encryption of all data, that's encryption of all laptops, devices, and anything which is being transmitted. You need to make sure, well, the leaders need to make sure that they've got some form of detection on there. Endpoint detection response engines have become more and more prevalent in the industry. We're moving away from traditional antivirus, which is kind of this has happened, let's try and fix it, to a detection engine which can pick up when things are happening and you can actually act on those. And making sure that we've got response plans in place and thought about, if this attack happens and this type of attack happens, what are we going to do? Who needs to be involved, and what are the steps that we need to take, rather than the incident happening and then thinking about what they need to do to remediate that. So making sure that you have all of those things in place can really assist when or if the worst ever were to happen. The last line of defense is always your backups, and making sure that you can recover in the event of an attack happening. Where are you backing up your data? Who is able to access those backups? Because more and more you hear in the news people who've got backups which are online, which are accessible via their administrators. Their administrators are the ones which have been compromised. They delete the backups, and then they end up paying the cyber criminals. The way to avoid that is making sure that you've got air-gapped backups, backups which are offline. Make sure that you've got immutable backups if possible as well, and that you know where your data is sat. And that's some of the key things that I would say to do with that.
We talked, Owen, at the beginning a little bit about the fact that, a lot of us are in a much more hybrid working environment now. I certainly am in my kitchen studio. How do we enable hybrid working without impacting employee performance?
Well, really, from this perspective, I think it's key that we use all of the tools available to us to assist the end users, but also monitor their performance. So more and more things like the evolution of Power BI and the ability to interrogate data from multiple disparate systems to actually understand what the employees are doing, how productive they are, and being able to have that conversation with them. On Tuesday, for whatever reason, productivity dropped off a cliff. Is there any particular reason behind that? Can we help you with anything? And it's working with employees to make sure that they've got all of the tools at their disposal to achieve what they need, rather than potentially using that information as a hammer to beat them with. Let's use it to enable them to achieve more.
Geoff, I'm just wondering how much impact you've been able to make in terms of measurable improvements.
Measure improvements to the digital infrastructure in the county. Yeah, huge amounts, as we touched on earlier, 42% to 96% increase in super fast coverage. Just over the last quarter, our gigabit capable connections have increased from 10% to 14%. So that's 1% per month, which is pretty incredible. IoT network from nothing to ubiquitous coverage in 2 years. Other stats I think really relevant and interesting. When we first contracted with OpenReach to do our super fast improvement, we had a 20% take up target. We're currently at 78%, which means lots and lots of additional funding coming in. So the latest round of improvements we're making with no additional government money. It's all come from clawback from that agreement because we've had so much higher take up than anticipated. And actually, in some ways, that's the biggest measure of success for me, that it's there and that people are using it.
And what challenges, Geoff, do you see in the short term for you? I mean, you sound like you're very well across it in Norfolk and making great strides, but what keeps you awake at night?
Well, the rurality is a challenge, of course.
Yeah.
There are always going to be those hard to reach properties. So going from 42% to 96 probably isn't much easier or much more difficult than going from 96 to 100. So embracing the next set of technologies, probably fixed wireless access, maybe some low orbit satellite. That will be part of the challenge that we'll have to embrace. Getting mobile coverage to get to the level ubiquitous coverage will be a challenge because that's not the current government targets and not the current industry targets. So we need to support them to go further. And then cybersecurity, of course, the more we increase the access to digital and the more we connect devices, the more the threat surface grows. And sadly, there are lots of bad people out there around the world trying to exploit the infrastructure for their own financial or other gains. So we have to continuously up our game as a public sector, but also we have to continue to educate and support our residents and businesses to keep themselves cyber secure. And I have to say, adult learning and indeed learning for children online has been one of the big wins from the increased provision of this digital connectivity and devices as well. We've rolled out over 5,000 laptops this year to children in Norfolk who didn't have them previously, who were digitally disconnected. That was just during the month of February alone, while they were suddenly having to be homeschooled.
Yes.
And what a great legacy that is potentially for the future. But we've got to make sure that as well as the kit and the connectivity, they've got the skills and the wider understanding of safe online. That means that they can properly exploit it and not be at risk.
Yvonne, we've got 1 minute left. Given that there's been a fairly consistent set of policy announcements, strategies and initiatives for the better use of technology over the last 25 years, what's going to make the difference to getting it right, do you think, this time round?
I think the real challenge now is government really are desperate to join up citizen services to make them better for citizens. And to do that, so many things need to be brought together. And tackling this, the whole of this, not just it will be solved by standards or it will be solved by new technology, or there's no single solution to that. So it's really quite a complex, it's a complex challenge to tackle and needs to be, the elephant now needs to be bitten off in chunks. So really important that it's the totality of what needs to be done is understood.
Owen, the elephant needs to be bitten off in chunks. Absolute final thought of this panel to you, please.
Well, yeah. So, I totally agree that rather than looking at a big project, putting it into smaller chunks is always more achievable. So whenever doing anything on your infrastructure, look at the big picture, but break it down into smaller chunks, which are more achievable. And that will always help.
Gosh, our half hour has absolutely flown by. What a great and engaging way to start the day. So a very big thank you to all of my brilliant panelists, and thank you to our audience for listening. We didn't actually get any questions in that session. I think you're all quite captivated, so do ask them in the next session. Let's take a break now. It's your first chance to engage with speed networking functionality. I'll see you back here in 10 minutes time.